Single dad fixes a billionaire's car in the rain. Then she whispered, "I want to see you again." A true story. It was the kind of rain that doesn't ask permission. It just shows up. Heavy. Sideways. The kind that turns your windshield into a wall of gray and makes every headlight on the road look like it's slowly bleeding out into the dark. David pulled his old Honda off County Road 9 at 8:14 in the evening and sat there for a moment with the engine still running and his hands still on the wheel. Not because anything was wrong with the car, because Lily had asked him, for the fourth time that hour, whether they were almost home. He could feel his voice going toward a place he didn't want her to hear, so he pulled over instead of answering. She was 6. She'd inherited her mother's ability to read the air in a room. A car counted as a room. 5 minutes, Bug, he said, keeping his eyes on the rain outside. You said 5 minutes before, she said. I know, she went quiet. That was somehow worse than the asking. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror for half a second. 41 years old. Hair still damp from the morning, because he'd rushed the school drop-off and forgotten the dryer was broken. 3-day stubble, because the mornings moved too fast for razors lately. Eyes that used to be just regular tired, but had somewhere along the way become the deeper kind that didn't fully go away with sleep. He looked away. He got out into the rain and popped the hood and started working on a loose belt he'd been putting off fixing for 2 weeks. It wasn't urgent. He just needed somewhere to put his hands that wasn't the steering wheel. That was when he saw the hazard lights. A quarter-mile back down the road, maybe a little less. Just blinking orange in the dark, and the rain like a small fire that couldn't quite stay lit. A black car, low and expensive, angled wrong on the shoulder, like someone had stopped without caring much how. David stood there with rain running off the back of his jacket and looked at the hazard lights for a moment. He thought about Lily in the back seat, thought about the $47 in his wallet and whether the Thai place on 8th was still open at this hour. Thought about the stack of permission slips on the kitchen counter he kept forgetting to sign. Thought about how long the remaining drive was and how early tomorrow started. He looked at the hazard lights again. They just kept blinking. Patient. Orange. Alone in the rain. He grabbed his toolkit from the trunk. The car was a Mercedes. The kind with a small silver badge on the back that means someone made a very specific kind of decision about what to do with their money. No dents anywhere. No scratches. Cleaner than any car had a right to be on a night like this one. He knocked on the driver's window with 2 knuckles. The polite knock. Not demanding, just announcing. The woman inside flinched. Full body flinch. Shoulders up near her ears. And for a split second her face did something completely real and completely unguarded, the face of a person who'd been alone with something and didn't expect the world to arrive. Then it didn't anymore. She caught herself and pulled herself back together so fast he would have missed it if he'd been looking anywhere else. She cracked the window an inch. Just an inch. "I've already called someone," she said. Her voice was flat and careful. The voice of a person who was used to speaking and having people listen and not require any further explanation. David looked at the rain coming down, looked back at her. "AAA runs about 40 minutes out here on a Wednesday," he said. "Maybe more in weather like this. I'm already wet, so it doesn't cost me anything." She looked at him through the 1-inch gap with an expression that was calculating risk. He'd seen that expression before. Not on strangers usually, but he understood it. The arithmetic of deciding how much to trust something. Then she opened the door. She was maybe late 30s, dark hair pulled back in a way that had started the day neat and was losing that argument. She was wearing one of those coats that cost what David's rent used to cost before the move. She stood in the rain without mentioning it and waited while he moved to the front of the car. Her name was Noor. She said it the way you slide something across a table, close enough to be polite, but not so far that it meant anything yet. "David," he said. She nodded once. The nod of someone who has filed the information somewhere sensible. Serpentine belt. Snapped clean through and wound around itself like it had made a decision. That was all it was. David had fixed one of these before. Twice, actually. Once in a parking garage at 23 with a borrowed socket set and the specific confidence of someone who doesn't know enough yet to fully understand the risk. Once in his ex-wife's parents' driveway on Christmas morning, which had been a very different kind of occasion with a very different atmosphere, his hands just knew what to do. That was the thing that happened when you did the same hard things over and over for long enough. The knowledge stopped living in your head and moved into your hands instead. Your head could be completely elsewhere, and your hands would just get on with it. He had a spare belt in his kit. He always had a spare of the things that most reliably broke at the most inconvenient times. Lily's pediatrician had called him overprepared once. The light way people say it, like it's an endearing quirk. David had smiled and not explained that being overprepared wasn't a quirk. It was what happened when you were the only person coming if something went wrong. It was what happened when the safety net was you. Noor stood at his elbow holding a small flashlight she'd found in the glove box. She held it without being asked and pointed it where it needed to go. She didn't offer to help with parts she couldn't help with. She didn't make the kind of conversation people make when they're uncomfortable in silence. She just held the light steady and let him work. David noticed this. It sat somewhere in him in a way he didn't catalog immediately. Like a sound you hear that you can't place right away, so you just carry it around while you're doing something else. "You do this a lot?" she asked eventually. 20 minutes in, maybe more. "Fix cars? Stop for strangers?" He thought about it. Actually thought, rather than giving the quick answer. "No," he said. "Not usually." "What made you stop tonight?" He was quiet for a moment. His hands kept working. The rain had pulled back slightly, still steady, but no longer fully sideways. "Honestly, I'm not sure," he said. "You just see something and you either stop or you don't. Tonight I stopped." She was quiet at that. The flashlight stayed where it needed to be. It was the sound of the car door that got him. Not Noor's door, the other one. Small feet on wet asphalt. That particular careless slap of footsteps that belongs entirely to children who haven't learned yet to be cautious about the world. David straightened up before he'd even heard her voice. Something in him just calibrated before his brain caught up. "Daddy." "Hey, Bug. Back in the car, please. I woke up and you weren't there." "I'm right here. I'm 10 steps away. Car. Who's that?" Lily was looking at Noor with the particular unblinking focus of a 6-year-old who has learned that staring is technically impolite, but has decided this does not always apply to her. Her hair was flat on one side from the car seat. She had a blanket dragging off one wrist. She looked like a very small person who had just woken up and had a lot of questions about the immediate situation. Noor had gone very still. The specific stillness adults sometimes go into around small children they weren't expecting, like if they don't move, the child won't fully register them. This did not work on Lily. "You're really wet," Lily said. "Informational, not unkind." "I am," Noor agreed. "We have a towel in our car. It's got dinosaurs on it, but it still works really well. A beat. One of those tiny ones that's actually not tiny at all." "That's very kind of you," Noor said. And something in the way she said it shifted, just slightly. Like a room when someone opens a window. You don't notice the exact moment, you just notice that something in the air is different. Her voice had been controlled and careful the entire time, and then in that single sentence it became something a little softer. Not performed softness. The real thing. Arrived without announcement. "Come on, Bug," David said. "Back in the car. I'm almost done." Lily went, but not without giving Noor one last look. Long and considering, the way she looked at things she was making up her mind about. Noor watched her go. David noticed that too. He went back to the belt, he tightened the last bolt, and tested the fit, and closed the hood and wiped his hands on the cloth from the kit. "Run it," he said, "just to check." She got in. The engine turned over immediately. Clean. No drag, no noise. Nothing unhappy about it. She got back out. She had her wallet in her hand. Slim. Dark gray. Understated in the way expensive things often are once they have nothing left to prove. She held it without quite offering it yet, like she was still working out the form this was going to take. "What do I owe you?" she said. Not a question. A negotiation opener. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him. The risk calculation expression again. "Let me pay you what a mechanic would have charged. It's not a small job in this weather." I know. Still no. I can arrange. Noor. He said her name for the first time. She stopped. Pass it on somewhere. Pay it forward to someone else. That's it. She looked at him for a long moment. The rain had pulled back further now, down to a mist. The hazard lights were still blinking behind her, and without saying anything, David reached past her and turned them off. She let him. That's a generous way to handle this, she said carefully, like she was weighing the word generous before she committed to it. Not really, he said. It's just practical. Someone helped me once when I needed it. Now I'm passing it on. It's just how it moves. She looked at him. He couldn't entirely read the expression. Not suspicion exactly. Something more like the look of a person who had just encountered a thing they had forgotten was a thing. He started walking back toward his car. He'd almost gotten there when he heard it. Her voice. Quiet. Not loud enough to be certain it was meant to carry all the way to him. Or maybe exactly loud enough. He never decided. I want to see you again. He stopped walking. He stood there for a second in the rain mist with his toolkit in his hand. It wasn't the words themselves, or it wasn't only the words. It was the way they came out, stripped of everything. No pitch, no performance, no qualification built in for a graceful exit if he said no. Just those 5 words sitting plainly in the wet air between them, unprotected. He turned around. She was still standing beside her car, arms slightly stiff at her sides. Her face had the particular expression of a person who has said a true thing out loud and is now waiting to find out what that costs. David reached into his jacket, found a gas station receipt from 2 days ago, slightly damp around the edges, pulled the pin he always kept in his left breast pocket, the one with the cap permanently half chewed off from the months he'd tried to quit chewing pins and had successfully quit all other pins except this one, and wrote his number on the back. He held it out across the wet space between them. She crossed the distance and took it. Both hands. Not one. Both. He got back in his car. Lily was asleep again, the blanket rearranged around herself in the particular way she arranged things when she was deeply unconscious. The dinosaur towel was somehow in her arms now. He didn't know when that had happened. He sat there for a moment without starting the car. He wasn't feeling anything in particular, or he was feeling everything in no particular order, which amounts to the same thing for a minute or two. He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road and headed home. He didn't tell anyone about it. There was really no one to tell in the way he would have wanted to tell it. His mother would ask questions in the loaded way she had, the way that turned everything into a conversation about whether David was finally moving on and being good to himself, which he found he couldn't have on a normal Tuesday evening after work and school pickup. His friend Tariq would immediately make it into something it wasn't yet. Tariq was genuinely happy for him in advance of any actual happiness occurring, which was a quality David appreciated in theory and found exhausting in practice. And Lily was 6, so that was that. So he just went home. He fed Lily leftovers from the previous night because he'd forgotten to take something out of the freezer again. He did the bath, the books, the first round of tucking in, the glass of water she didn't actually need, the second round of tucking in, the question about whether dinosaurs could swim that required a more detailed answer than he had energy for. All the things that were the same every night, the things that were exhausting, and also the things that were the shape of his life. He sat in the quiet kitchen afterward with a cup of tea he'd made and not drunk. The clock said 10:22. He looked at his phone. Nothing. He told himself he wasn't expecting anything. He told himself this with moderate success. He went to bed and lay there for a while in the particular awake but horizontal state that had become his normal since the divorce 2 years ago. Not sad exactly, more like the strangeness of a house that was his now, fully and without negotiation, but that he still hadn't entirely filled up with himself yet. There were corners in it that still felt like absence rather than space. Sleep came eventually. It usually did. 3 days later, Tuesday, 11:52 at night, he was in bed, reading the same 2 pages of a book he'd been reading the same 2 pages of for 6 weeks, when his phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number, 3 words. Are you free? He looked at it for a moment, set the book face down on his chest in a way that was a confession about how much he'd actually been reading it, picked the phone back up. He typed, "Saturday morning. Coffee." The reply came faster than he expected. "I don't drink coffee." He looked at the ceiling for a second. Something in his chest moved. He typed, "You'll manage." A pause, shorter this time. "Where?" He typed the name of a small place on Row Street. It was the kind of place that had been there since before it was fashionable to be there, with mismatched chairs from 5 different decades and a radio behind the counter that was always playing something from the 1980s, and a man named Paul at the register who called everyone boss and meant it warmly. The kind of place that cost $8 and had no opinion about who you were when you walked in. He had chosen it specifically. He turned this over in his mind for a moment. Whether it was a statement or just honestly where he liked to go, he came to no definite conclusion. She replied, "I'll find it." He put the phone down and lay there in the dark for a bit longer than he needed to. He went to sleep. She was already there when he arrived. He'd been on time, which meant she'd been early, and he noticed this without making a comment about it. She was in a window seat, wearing something simpler than the coat from County Road 9. Her hair was down. She was looking at her phone when he came through the door, but she looked up before he'd made it halfway across the room, which meant she'd been paying more attention to the door than to the phone. He sat down across from her. Paul came over without being asked and put a coffee in front of David. Noor had a tea already, a small pot, which meant she'd been here long enough to order and wait. He filed this away. "You found it," he said. "You said I would," she said. There was a silence between them. Not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that takes some work to land in, even between people who know each other well, and they didn't know each other at all, which made it feel stranger, and also somehow better. "Can I ask you something?" she said, after the silence had sat long enough. "Sure. Why did you stop? That night, really?" He looked at his coffee. He'd had the long version of this ready, in case, and he looked at it now and chose the short one. "I don't fully know," he said. "Sometimes you just do the thing. You see something, and you just do it. There's not always a reason that makes sense to explain." She looked at him with an expression that was weighing this against what she'd expected and not arriving at disappointment. She nodded slightly. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. "Lily. Lily." And he did. He talked about Lily, the way you can only talk about something you love completely and are also, simultaneously, completely tired out by. He talked about how she woke up in the morning already in the middle of a thought, like sleep was just a brief interruption to something she'd been working on and was ready to continue the moment she opened her eyes. About how she'd decided at age 5 that vegetables were fundamentally untrustworthy and had created what she called evidence, which was a drawing of a sad carrot with a frowning face. About how she asked questions in the car that he didn't have good answers to. The real questions. Why do people leave? Where do dogs go? How do you know when someone loves you? She sounds like a lot, Noor said. Not dismissively, more like someone doing an honest assessment. She's everything, David said. Then quieter. She's also a lot. Noor smiled. Barely. But it went to her eyes, which was the part that counted. He noticed that the full smile was not the default expression. The careful, polite, professional version was the default. The real one was something she didn't give out the same way. This observation sat in him without him needing to do anything with it right away. The second Saturday she asked what he did. He was a maintenance supervisor at a mid-sized residential property company. He managed 3 buildings and a team of 4. He told her this the same way he always told people, without apology and without the slight defensive inflation some people added when they thought their job needed defending. She didn't react the way people sometimes did when they expected something different. She just asked the next question. What did he find most difficult about it? What he'd do differently if he could redesign the operation from scratch? She asked the way someone asks who is genuinely curious about work, not making conversation about work. He found himself going further into it than he usually did, into the things he'd figured out about buildings over the years, how they were basically living things, how they had systems that talked to each other in ways nobody had written down, and if you didn't understand the conversation, you'd be fixing the wrong thing forever. How half the job was reading what the building was trying to tell you before it became an emergency. She was listening, actually listening. "You like it," she said. "I do," he said. "I like things I can fix." A small pause. "I like things I understand," he corrected himself. "Sometimes that's the same as fixing them. Sometimes it's not." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, like he'd said something she'd been thinking. They had a second coffee. She had another pot of tea. She had never touched coffee. This was apparently not flexible. And they sat there past the first hour and into the second without either of them mentioning that they'd been there that long. He walked her to her car afterward. This was not planned or discussed. He just did it, and she didn't object. They stood on the pavement on Rose Street in the cold autumn air. "Same place," he said. "Next week." She pulled her coat around her, looked at him. "Yes," she said, one word, looking directly at him. No qualifier, no small print, no polite way out built into it. Just yes. Tariq found out on a Sunday afternoon at the park. This was not surprising. Tariq had a gift, a genuinely unusual one, for finding out things that David hadn't said, which David alternately appreciated and found maddening, depending on the day. "So," said Tariq, they were watching Lily try to make friends with a golden retriever that very clearly did not want to make friends, which Lily was interpreting as a challenge rather than a clear message. "So," David said, 2 Saturdays in a row. Same place. Early." David looked at the dog, which had now backed up 4 feet and sat down in what was a fairly obvious communication. Lily took this as an invitation to sit down too. She sat down in the wet grass 2 feet from the dog and stared at it. The dog stared back. "I like the coffee," David said. "You have the same coffee at home. You've had the same coffee at home for 9 years." "I like the place," David. "It's early," David said. "I don't know what it is. It's 2 Saturdays. What do you know?" He thought about it properly. He didn't give Tariq the quick version because Tariq would immediately find the holes in the quick version. "She's not easy," he said. "Not in a complicated way. More in the way of someone who's been responsible for a lot of things for a long time and doesn't naturally let anyone else carry anything." "And you find that—" "I find it familiar," David said. He wasn't looking at Tariq. He was watching Lily, who had now moved 3 inches closer to the dog and was narrating this progress in a low, confident voice. "I find it familiar, in a way I recognize." Tariq was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for Tariq. "She sounds like she needs a lot of patience," Tariq said. "She's worth being patient with," David said. Then he stopped, because that was more than he'd meant to say. Tariq smiled. "Don't," said David. "I'm not doing anything," said Tariq. Lily had successfully gotten within arm's reach of the dog. The dog appeared to have decided she was not going away and was now allowing itself to be petted, which Lily received as complete vindication of her entire approach. She came running back. "I told you," she said, out of breath. "You just have to keep trying." "That's very true," said Tariq, looking at David. David threw a piece of biscuit at him. The 3rd Saturday, she arrived with a paper bag. She slid it across the table without explanation, without making it a moment, which somehow made it more of a moment. Inside was a small book, old cover, slim, a collection of short stories by a writer he didn't know. "You mentioned you hadn't been reading," she said, by way of explanation. "You said it like it was something you missed." He looked at the book, then at her. "I said that once," he said. "You say things once, and then don't say them again. When they matter, I mean. The things that don't matter you repeat." He sat with that for a moment. It was accurate, and he wasn't sure how she'd accumulated enough observations to make it. "Have you been taking notes?" he said. "Everyone pays attention," she said. "Most people just pretend they don't." He opened the book to the first story, read the first paragraph, put it down carefully. "Good?" she asked. "Give me a second," he said. She smiled. The real one, the one that reached her eyes. He was starting to understand that it was rare, not because she was cold, but because she was careful. And the things that were carefully given felt different from the things that were freely given. They had more weight. They meant more. The way the things that cost someone something always meant more than the things that didn't. She told him what she did on the 4th Saturday. It came up in the middle of a conversation about something else, the way the real things generally surfaced. She ran a company, healthcare technology, 3,000 employees, offices in 6 countries, an office in the building on Hargreave Street that David drove past on the way to Lily's school every morning. She had started it 12 years ago in a rented office barely bigger than his kitchen, with one other person and a spreadsheet and a problem that had made her angry enough to want to solve it. She said this last part without any particular drama, like it was simply chronology. David was quiet for a moment. "You were sitting on the side of County Road 9 in the rain," he said. "The belt broke," she said. "You told me you'd called someone." "I was going to." He looked at her. "I'd been driving for about an hour before it happened," she said, after a short pause. "I do that sometimes. When things at work or—" She stopped, started again. "When I need to not be somewhere, I drive." And then the belt went, which felt like the universe making a point. He nodded. He didn't push further, and she didn't offer more, but she looked slightly lighter for having said it. Like she'd been carrying it around and had just put it down on the table between them. "It's not the life it looks like from the outside," she said. "Most things aren't," he said. They sat with that. Outside on Rose Street, a Saturday was happening. People with dogs, people with pushchairs, 2 men arguing about parking in the low-grade way. People argue about parking when they're not really that upset, but need somewhere to put the morning's energy. An ordinary Saturday. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Yes. That night on the road, when I knocked on the window, you were scared." Not a question. Just a direct thing he said, because they'd had 4 Saturdays now, and he trusted them enough to say it directly. She didn't deny it. "I don't like surprises," she said. "I never have. I prefer to know what's coming." "Does that make things difficult?" A pause long enough to be honest. "Constantly," she said. She said it like it was the truest thing she'd said in a long time. Maybe it was. In October they walked instead of sitting. Lily was with his mother for the afternoon, which was a slightly complicated arrangement that he was grateful for, without examining too closely. No destination. Just the park and then the long path along the river where the trees had turned, and everything smelled like cold air and that particular sweetness underneath it that October had. The light was low and warm and made everything look like it was about to finish. She had her hands in her pockets. He had his in his jacket. They walked at the same pace without discussing it. "Do you miss being married?" she asked. He thought about the honest answer versus the polished one, and chose the honest one because he'd been choosing that with her for several weeks now, and it was starting to feel like the only one worth giving. "I miss the idea I had of what it was going to be," he said. "The actual thing I was in, toward the end, I don't miss that." What was it like toward the end? Quiet in the wrong way. We both knew something, and neither of us was saying it, because saying it made it real. And then we said it, and it was, and then we dealt with it. How long did it take to deal with it? Officially, about 8 months of paperwork. Actually, still in progress. She was quiet. They walked along the river path and a duck moved through the water below them, with complete indifference to everything. "She was a good person," he said. About his ex-wife. "She still is. We just wanted things that weren't going to be compatible, and we took about 2 years too long to say that clearly." "That's a kind way to talk about it," Noor said. "It's accurate," he said. "The anger about it didn't help anyone. It definitely didn't help Lily. So I let it go. Not all at once, but I let it go." She looked sideways at him, the considering look, the one she used when she was actually recalibrating something. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She thought about it without rushing. "Someone simpler," she said. "I don't mean that as an insult. I mean someone whose life had fewer layers. When I took that receipt, I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought it would be a nice thing, a brief thing. And now?" She looked at the river. "Now I'm less sure what it is," she said. "I'm still working it out." "That's fair," he said. "You're not bothered by that?" she asked. "Not knowing? I've got Lily and a job and a boiler that's been thinking about breaking down for 3 months," he said. "I've got a lot of things I can't fully control. One more is okay." She looked at him again. He couldn't fully read the expression. Something in it was close to recognition, the look of seeing something you've thought about but not yet articulated, and suddenly it's there in front of you. They walked back in the direction they'd come from, and the light kept doing its low October thing, and neither of them tried to fill the quiet that came after that. It was a Tuesday in November when she called in the middle of his grocery run. Lily was in the produce section, very seriously selecting a parsnip she'd decided was necessary. She had named it Gerald before they'd left the house, which meant the decision was already made, and the visit to the shop was ceremonial. David answered because he always picked up when she called. He'd noticed this about himself a few weeks ago, without making a decision about what it meant. "Hey," he said, "are you busy?" Her voice was flat in a different way than the controlled flat he'd gotten used to. Flatter, the flatness of something squeezed too tight. Mild produce crisis. "What's up?" "I'm having a terrible day." A pause. Short. "I don't usually say that." "I know," he said. And he did. "I just needed to say it to someone." "Okay," he said. "Say it." She said it again. And the second time it came out differently than the first. Like a thing she'd been holding that she'd finally put down somewhere solid. She told him what had happened. A board decision that overruled something she'd spent 6 months building toward. Not a failure exactly. More like being moved off the chessboard while someone else made the move with her piece. The thing she'd built, going in a direction she hadn't chosen. David stood in the produce section with Gerald the parsnip in the basket and listened. Lily pointed at something she wanted. He put it in the basket without looking at it. "That sounds awful," he said. "I'm sorry." "It'll be fine," she said. He could hear her pulling herself together over the phone. The armoring up process he'd come to recognize. The competence coming back online. "Probably," he said, "but right now it isn't fine yet." "You don't have to skip ahead to fine." A silence on the line. "Daddy," said Lily, loudly and with no concept of timing. "1 second, bug." Then, into the phone. "Sorry, she's with me." "I heard," Noor said. Then, "Is she okay?" "She's selecting vegetables with opinions," David said. A sound on the line that was almost a laugh. Something in his chest unwound a bit. "Noor," he said, "do you eat soup?" A pause long enough to mean she understood the question was not actually about soup. "Yes," she said, "I eat soup. We're making some. You're welcome to join. It's going to be Lily's recipe, which means it'll be creative, but it'll be hot, and there'll be good bread if I remember to get it." The pause this time was her deciding. He could feel the architecture of her, all the careful systems she had, deciding whether to open a door. "Text me the address," she said. She arrived with good bread. The kind from the artisan bakery on the corner of Marsh Street that David had walked past and considered buying twice, and talked himself out of twice, because it cost what he considered a political amount for a loaf. She'd found it, gone in, and arrived at his door with it under her arm like she bought expensive bread on an ordinary Tuesday without thinking about it, which she probably did. Lily met her at the door. She had flour on both hands from getting into the flour bag without being asked, which was technically unrelated to soup, but which David had decided not to escalate. She looked at Noor with her full attention. Noor looked back. "You're the wet lady," Lily said. Purely factual. "I was," Noor said. "I'm dry now." Lily considered this as a satisfactory update. Stepped back from the door like a small host. Noor came in. The apartment was not large. It had the organized chaos of a home where someone was in charge of everything and not always on top of all of it. Lily's drawing held to the fridge by a pineapple magnet. Shoes by the door in a row that was almost a row. Books on the coffee table that had been there long enough to be furniture. Everything worn and comfortable and, most importantly, lived in by real people in the actual process of living. Noor looked at it, not critically, more the way you look at something you haven't seen in a long time and are surprised to find you've missed it. David handed her a glass of water and went back to the kitchen. From there he could hear Lily begin the soup briefing. She explained each vegetable and its contribution to the project. She described Gerald the parsnip as foundational. She was very clear about the hierarchy. Noor listened with total seriousness and zero condescension, which David noted from across the kitchen. She never patronized and she never performed enthusiasm she didn't have. She just listened to the soup briefing the way she listened to everything else. Gerald sounds like he carries a lot of responsibility, Noor said. He does, Lily said, completely pleased that this had been understood. Don't tell the carrots. They think they're equally important. Secret's safe, said Noor. David stood at the stove and listened to this, and felt something in him settle that he hadn't consciously noticed was unsettled. Like a door he'd been leaning against, just slightly, without knowing why, that someone had walked through without incident. The soup was, against reasonable expectation, genuinely good. Gerald had delivered. David had adjusted 3 things in the kitchen when Lily wasn't looking and was never going to admit to any of them. Lily fell asleep on the sofa at 8 o'clock with a penguin documentary on the TV, and her head at the angle that should have been painful and clearly wasn't. She was completely out, the specific sleep of small children who have had full days. David and Noor sat at the kitchen table with tea. "How are you now?" he asked. "The terrible day." She thought about it honestly. "Better," she said. "Still a bad day, but better than it was at 4 o'clock. "Good." She looked at her mug, then at him. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Letting people—" She stopped. Found it again. "I'm better at being capable than at being someone who accepts help." "I know," David said. "You held the flashlight that night. You didn't know me. You'd been sitting on the side of a road in the rain, and you didn't ask for anything, and you held the flashlight exactly where it needed to be the whole time, and you didn't make a thing of it." She looked up. "I thought about that," he said. "Afterward, I thought that said something true about you, that you know how to show up for things. You just don't apply that to yourself." The kitchen was quiet. The penguins did something on the television in the other room. Lily shifted in her sleep and resettled. Noor looked at him for a long moment. "How do you do that?" she said. "See people." "I pay attention," he said. "That's all. I just try to actually pay attention. Most people don't. I know. It's easier not to. It costs something to actually pay attention. People get tired and they look at the surface of things and they call that seeing." She was quiet for a long moment. Something in her face was doing something he didn't have a name for. Not quite emotion, more like a decision arriving. "David," she said. "Yeah, I'm glad you knocked on the window." He looked at her. "Me too," he said. He meant it fully and without complication. Things did not happen simply after that. They rarely do with the real ones. There were more Saturdays, more walks, more text messages that arrived late and were never quite small talk, even when they looked like it. There were disagreements, real ones, not the surface kind. Noor went blunt when she was scared, not meanly but without cushioning, and David went quiet when he was processing, and these 2 things needed to be worked on and were. She came to dinner again, then again. Lily moved through the phases that 6-year-olds moved through when someone new entered the frame. From formal assessment, to cautious approval, to the fully relaxed state in which she showed Noor her rock collection and her drawings and the rules of the game she'd invented that changed every week. Noor followed the rules without losing track of them, even when they changed. Lily noticed. She had her mother's ability to notice the things that mattered. David's mother met Noor at Christmas. His mother shook Noor's hand and then looked at David with an expression that said a great deal, while saying nothing at all, and he looked back at her with an expression that said he was aware and was taking it one thing at a time, and they understood each other completely, which was the particular language of 40 years of knowing someone well. Noor brought bread again. His mother described this afterward as a good sign. David agreed, privately, that it probably was. One night in February, he was tucking Lily in for the 2nd time, which was a nightly ritual anchored in questions she invented to keep the day going a little longer. She looked up at him from the pillow. "Is the soup lady going to keep coming?" she asked. He sat on the edge of the bed. "I think so," he said. "Is that okay?" She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. "She listens to everything I say," Lily said. "She doesn't pretend to listen. She actually does." "Yeah," he said. "She does." And she took Gerald seriously. Lily paused. "That matters." "It does," David agreed. He turned the light off and stood in the hallway for a moment. He could hear the building settling in the winter cold, the particular sounds of it, the radiator, the distant traffic, the fridge in the kitchen, the sounds of his life, the shape of the days he had. He took his phone out, typed. She gave you full marks. Gerald was the deciding vote. He watched the 3 dots appear. Then, I had a feeling about Gerald from the start. He smiled, leaned his shoulder against the wall. He thought about County Road 9, the rain going sideways, the orange hazard lights blinking in the dark, himself standing there with a toolkit and $47 and a sleeping child in the car and a very reasonable case for just driving past. He thought about the weight of a gas station receipt being taken with both hands. You couldn't see it from inside the moment. That was the thing. You never could. Standing there in the rain with the belt and the flashlight and the child running up in her blanket, you couldn't see that it was a door. It looked like a Tuesday. It looked like inconvenience. It looked like a detour from the thing you were already on your way to. Sometimes the detour is the thing. He turned off the hall light. He went to make himself tea, which he would probably also let go cold, because that was the kind of man he was, and tonight he didn't mind that at all. Outside it was February. Clear and cold and still, the way February nights sometimes were. He stood at the kitchen window for a moment with the kettle just starting to heat, and looked out at the street below, the lamplight on the wet pavement, the ordinary and specific beauty of the city at night doing its quiet thing. He looked at his phone one more time. One more message from her, sent a few seconds ago. Good night, David. 2 words. Plain. No performance. He typed back. Good night. The kettle finished. He made the tea. He went to bed. He slept well. That was all. That was everything. She called him one morning in March, before the day had started properly, while he was still in the kitchen with his first coffee, and Lily was still asleep, and the flat had that particular early morning quality of being full of quiet that was good, rather than the other kind. I want to tell you something, she said. He moved to the window with his coffee. When I was building the company, she said, the first 3 years, I didn't take a single day off, not one. My assistant at the time, a woman named Priya, who I should have paid twice what I paid her, once came to my office on a Sunday and told me she was worried about me. I told her I was fine. I told her that this was just what the work required and that I understood the cost. She paused. She left 6 months later, Noor said, for somewhere with better hours. She didn't say it was because of me, but it was partly because of me, because I had set the standard, and the standard was unreasonable. Why are you telling me this? He said. A pause. Because I do the same thing to myself that I did to the company, she said. I set a standard, and then I hold to it even when it's unreasonable. And I've been trying lately to notice when I'm doing that. And I called you before 7 in the morning, she said. And I didn't apologize for it first. So, progress. He looked out at the street. March light on wet pavement. That's good, he said. That's actually good. Don't make it a thing, she said. But she said it in the way she sometimes said things that meant the opposite. I'm not, he said. I'm just. He stopped. I'm glad you told me, that's all. A silence. Comfortable. The good kind. Go wake your daughter up, she said. She'll be annoyed you let her sleep too long. She will, he agreed. He went and woke Lily up. She was, in fact, annoyed. She had things to do. There was a night in March that almost went wrong. Not catastrophically. Not the kind of wrong that ended things. The quieter kind, that could if you let it. They'd been out for dinner. The first proper dinner. Not coffee. Not the kitchen table. An actual restaurant with a reservation and a menu, and the slight formality of being somewhere that required a reservation. It had been Noor's idea. The restaurant was one she'd been to many times for work, and knew well, and she'd been generous in suggesting it. David had felt it from the moment he'd looked at the menu. Not the price, exactly, more the specific feeling of being in a place built for a kind of life that was not his life. The wine list had its own separate book. The staff moved with a particular fluency he recognized as the fluency of people who worked in rooms where they were paid to be invisible. He'd ordered simply, and said nothing, and had a good time, mostly, because Noor was good company, and she was relaxed in a way she wasn't always relaxed, and that was its own good thing. But driving home he was quiet. She noticed. Of course she did. Say it, she said. I'm fine. David. He drove for another half a block. I don't want to be someone you take places, he said. As in, I don't want to be the project. The interesting departure from the usual thing. She was quiet. That's not what this is, she said finally. I know, he said. I know that. I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying I noticed the feeling, and I'd rather say it than sit on it. She turned in her seat to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. Where I feel at ease, she said slowly, carefully, is on Rose Street with Paul calling everyone boss. That's where I feel like myself. What we did tonight was for me, actually, because I wanted to take you somewhere that was mine too, something I like that I wanted to share. It wasn't about showing you anything. He was quiet. Okay, he said. That's all you're going to say, she said. Yes, he said. You said what it was. I believe you. So, okay. She looked at him for another moment. You're very uncomplicated sometimes, she said. I'm not, he said, but I try not to borrow trouble. She faced forward again. They drove in quiet the rest of the way. Not the bad kind. The kind that followed something that had been said and heard and had landed correctly. He walked her to her door. She looked at him on the step. For what it's worth, she said, $8 at Rose Street is exactly where I want to be. You're not a project, you're… She stopped, looked for the word. You don't have to finish that, he said. I know, she said. I want to. She found it. You're the first person in a long time who makes me feel like the room is quieter when you arrive, she said. Not emptier, quieter, the right kind. He stood on her step in March. That's a good thing to say, he said. I know, she said. Good night, David. Good night. He walked back to his car. He sat in it for a moment, before starting it. The right kind of quiet. He turned the key. He drove home. April, a Wednesday. David was picking Lily up from school when she asked the question she'd been building toward for several weeks, without him realizing it. They were in the car. 3 minutes into the drive. Lily was still in her coat and had her book bag on her lap and was looking out the window at the things going past. Does Noor love us? She said. David kept his eyes on the road. That's a big question, Bug. I know. She was still looking out the window. Does she? He thought about the honest answer, the kind that was true for a 6-year-old without being too large for a 6-year-old. I think she cares about us very much, he said. Love is something that grows. It takes time, but I think she's someone who shows it by paying attention and showing up when things are hard. And she does both of those things. Lily thought about this. That's what you do too, she said. Yeah, he said. It is. So you're the same kind of person. He smiled. In some ways, he said. Lily appeared to find this satisfying. She looked back out the window. Okay, she said. Like it was settled. Like she'd been checking something off. He drove the rest of the way home in the particular warmth of something that doesn't need to be said, because it's been said by a 6-year-old in the back of a car on a Wednesday afternoon. Some things came out of the simplest moments. That was the whole truth of it. There was an evening in May when all 3 of them were at David's kitchen table at the same time, with no particular reason to be there. Lily was drawing. She had paper and the good pencils she kept in a case, and was working on something involving a dragon who appeared to be wearing a hat. She worked in silence, which was not her default mode, but drawing was the exception. Noor was reading the book he'd given her a month ago, which she'd come back to him about with 4 pages of what she called thoughts, which were actually more like an entire essay. She was on something new now. She'd brought it in her bag without announcing it and taken it out and read it the way she did everything, completely and without splitting her attention. David was making dinner. Nothing complicated. The kind of dinner that just required being present and patient and adding things in the right order. The kitchen was warm. The light outside was doing what May light did in the early evenings, low and gold through the window. He stood at the stove and looked at the 2 of them at his table, Lily with her dragon in a hat, Noor with her book. The sound of pencil on paper and the turn of a page, and the kitchen doing its kitchen sounds. He hadn't planned this, none of it. He'd just knocked on a window in the rain one night because something in him had decided to stop, and the rest had followed in its own time. He thought about what Lily had said in the car. "So you're the same kind of person." He thought about the gas station receipt taken with both hands. He thought about the right kind of quiet. Noor looked up from her book. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him standing at the stove. He looked back. 5 minutes, he said. She went back to her book. Lily didn't look up from the dragon. He turned back to the stove. Outside, a May evening was happening in the simple way evenings happened. Someone walking a dog, a car going past, the city being a city in its ordinary nighttime way. Nothing remarkable, everything ordinary, which was the same thing as everything. He made dinner. They ate. Lily described the dragon's backstory in considerable detail. Noor asked follow-up questions that suggested she was taking notes. He washed up. Lily fell asleep on the sofa. Noor helped him carry her to bed, which was something she'd never done before and which required very little conversation because neither of them needed one. They sat at the kitchen table again with tea. Neither of them said anything for a while. The right kind of quiet. "Thank you," she said, eventually. "For what?" he said. She looked at the table, then at him. "For stopping," she said. "That night, for stopping." He looked at her. "I nearly didn't," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it matter." The kitchen was quiet. Outside the city kept going. Somewhere a siren, somewhere someone's late music. The thousand ordinary sounds of a night that didn't know it was in anyone's story. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. That was the beginning of it, and also the story of it, and also all of it at once.